My name is Colleen. I am one of the hosts for this evening, joined by the wonderful Mr. Scott Fine. Scott, how are you?
Hi, Colleen. How are you?
Minus these technical issues, I'm doing really well.
Frustrating, I know.
It's always changing. It's always changing. But anyway, thank you so much for coming. Tonight we have on our Fridays with Igor, Mr. Igor Sushko, who is an American Bulldog breeder for over 22 years from clients all around the world. He is amazing. He has so much insight, and we are so happy that he is with us this evening. Igor, how are you doing?
Good, good.
Igor is like an encyclopedia of knowledge. It's amazing. All right, Igor, I know you got a special presentation for us tonight, so why don't you just get started?
Sure. So today we're going to focus on one specific case that we dealt with. It's a owner of ours that got a puppy from us and in San Diego. And I think it's going to be very illustrative in showing how the veterinary malpractice that was committed in the instance of this young dog was very repetitive and completely unknown and unnoticed by the owners. And really, at the core of it, it's the kind of things that we are there to prevent, but we can only do that when the owners take our advice to rely on us and have us involved with raising of their puppy. And in this situation, unfortunately, they sort of ran with just blindly relying on the veterinarian. And of course, that's in a normal world, that is completely how it should work. But that's not really the case in many instances with US vet care. So we're going to start basically on a timeline of from when the puppy was born. So you'll see it. I'll show a little bit of a presentation, a document that I prepared. And it all started when I received a call from the adult son in the family that owned this dog. The pup was at the time almost a year old, and they had been dealing with this various issues going to the vet, and we had no idea that was happening. And finally, when they did call me about it, probably because of frustration that they weren't getting the kind of help that was necessary to address the situation that was happening with the puppy. And I'm glad that they did, but it should have been done months and months and months before that. And actually, there were specific things that had the guidance that we should have been followed, this wouldn't have even happened. And that final call, or the initial call, when the pup was already almost a year old, was that the dog was just diagnosed with severe allergies by the veterinarian. And I collected the information about the symptoms, and the father in the family completely disagreed with that kind of diagnosis that the vet had issued, because he said, I don't see any allergies. And of course, symptomatically, it's completely inconsistent with any kind of allergies. It was very consistent with various infections. And so I ask, in this situation, right, what I have to do is I have to collect all that information in terms of what has been done to the dog by the veterinarian. So I ask for a complete medical record. And, to a lay person, you get that document, and it's oftentimes it's a huge puzzle, right? There's a lot of terminology that's used that's very unclear. Oftentimes it's very incomplete. With things like even dosages or frequency, even the diagnosis, right? There's so many things that sound like a diagnosis. There's a medical term for it that means absolutely nothing, right? It's an observational diagnosis. Right, like saying like some term for like a broken bone, like you can see that the bone is completely broken. The broken bone, like, it doesn't tell you why that happened, kind of thing. And so I'm gonna start with that page, actually. So this is a document that I prepared after having reviewed the medical records for this puppy. And again, keep in mind, not even a year old, and his medical record was like 25 pages, which is just crazy. So we can start with birth. November 3rd, 2020, this puppy was born. And we go through our typical regimen of, obviously not everything is going to be on here. Like, for example, like deworming that we would do, it's really not relevant to this, so it's not on here. But you see, like, so the vaccinations, and this is a vaccine that we use with our puppies. It's a more expensive vaccine, but it offers more protection. It's a very quality vaccine that we really like. So this pup was vaccinated twice, and then he was picked up by the owners from us at exactly 2 months old on January 3rd. So then the first time they went to the vet was on January 22nd. And here you see that they did a booster. And again, it's ambiguous because the vet record is ambiguous. I'm not sure which kind of vaccine they gave, right? Because like you see here, it's very specific. DAPPVL2 plus CV is the one that we do. And so they had given this vaccine to the puppy, which in its own is completely fine in terms of timing, all good. But at this visit, as it turned out, they upsold the owners to buy some kind of like a wellness package, which they convinced the owners would be cheaper over time, and it covers all the expenses of vaccinations and things. So the owners purchased that, and my advice to our owners is always never buy any kind of wellness package from a vet. And this was one of the probably big reasons as to how all of this transpired. So the owners provided the medical record that we give to the owners when they pick up the puppy to the vet during this visit, which showed the fact that this puppy already had 2 booster vaccines for things like parvo, distemper, etc. So this third vaccine right here on January 22nd at 2.5 months old, this should have been it in terms of any kind of booster vaccinations for the puppy for the year. The next vaccine that the puppy should have received should have been on January 22nd of 2022. Instead, the vets vaccinated this puppy with Kennel Cough Vaccine. And this is something that I think we touched on last time. Not very clear of this protocol that a lot of vets tend to follow. I think it seems to be more common maybe in California. The problem with this vaccine is that it can actually cause a kennel cough infection in the dog. And unbeknownst to the owners, it actually happened. So we'll get to that a little later. So same day, the medical record lists this puppy as healthy animal, according to the veterinarian. Because they purchased that wellness package, they got scheduled for another booster vaccine on February 3rd, which is not even 14 days, not even 2 weeks from the previous booster vaccine they received. And it's completely redundant at this point. The puppy doesn't need any more booster vaccines. So they gave the puppy a 4th vaccine because apparently somehow the fact that the puppy already had 2 vaccinations, as he should have, before he was ever taken to the vet by the new owners, that information never made it into their record, or they ignored it. Then the puppy was again vaccinated with a booster, 5th time. So this is all within a span of what, 3 months? Puppy got 5 vaccines plus Bordetella vaccine. And here things become to get more complicated, because the rabies vaccination, this is something we talked about last time, was administered at 4 months and 8 days old, which is absolutely horrible. This is when the puppy's immune system is going to be very vulnerable potentially because of the teething that starts at 3.5 months old. So finally, in May, this puppy actually, by these same vets, gets diagnosed with the kennel cough because they caught the fact that the dog has nasal discharge and coughing. So in the notes, it said actually he was doing this in the exam room, but this is something that the dog had been doing, according to the owners, for a while. And of course, this retroactively means that these vaccinations, after the puppy was administered this kennel cough vaccine that he didn't even need because he's a pet at home, and is not taken to like dog parks or encounter random dogs or is in kennel or anything like that. These vaccinations, so the booster number 4, booster number 5, the rabies vaccine, they were all done on a dog that already had kennel cough, and it went undiagnosed for months. So then he was prescribed an antibiotic, doxycycline, and some kind of quote unquote cough tablets that the owners decided not to even administer. And here you see other things already starting with the general health of the dog. The dog also had an ear infection at this point. And the vets use this medication called Claro, which is, I think it's pretty expensive, and it's done at the vet, and it's a syringe that's sort of packaged into the ear canal itself by the veterinarian. The problem is they administered this medication without ever diagnosing the type of infection that this puppy had in the ear. So then we can proceed to also, while this dog was already sick with kennel cough, so he's diagnosed with kennel cough on May 13th. He's also given Bravecto, like flea and tick medication, again, to a sick dog. Then the next medical record showed that 3 months thereafter, he is now being diagnosed with quote unquote allergy by this veterinarian, while also the medical record lists this dog as being a healthy animal. And he has bumps all over the body and different bumps on ears, according to the medical record. And he's administered Bravecto again, while the dog's immune system is absolutely going haywire. So you can see here in the red. Do you see my mouse by chance where I'm pointing?
Yes.
Okay. So you can see that essentially like every single visit that was made by these poor owners to the vet, the puppy's immune system was continuously compromised, right? So the booster number 4, given less than even 14 days prior to the from the previous booster, this is again a redundant booster to begin with. The puppy should have had maximum of 3. It's gonna have compromised the immune system. Booster number 5 is gonna compromise the immune system. Rabies at 4 months old is gonna potentially compromise the immune system and cause side effects like infections. The dog is gonna be more susceptible to other pathogens in the environment, which is actually what is happening here, right? He's been overloaded with these vaccinations. His poor developing immune system has been sort of just knocked down, and he's already infected with Bordetella. So they're listing a dog that has multiple infections, even according to them, like in a kennel, like a kennel cough. Now he's recovering from kennel cough, and he has an ear infection, bumps all over the body, and he's listed as healthy animal while also being listed as having an allergy. I mean, it's just a total oxymoron. And so then what did they decide to do to a healthy animal, according to them? Give him prednisone, a steroid. And again, you can see on May 13th, they gave him this antibiotic for his ear infection called Claro. They gave him again the same antibiotic for an infection 3 months later because it never resolved. So the dog is continuing to suffer from these infections, and the medication they're giving the dog is not helping. So then on September 16th, they give the dog another medication called Surulon for ears. And then they do a cytology, so that shows that the dog is positive for yeast inside the ears. And at no point here did they ever do a culture to determine what the infection is inside the ear. So a culture would actually show you specifically what kind of bacteria is present, what strain of the bacteria is present, and what kind of antibiotics would be effective against that specific bacteria. So now, look at this. They're giving the dog Apoquel, prescribing Apoquel on September 16th. And again, it's pounding, it's just pulverizing the immune system. Everything is they've given the dog is suppressing the immune system further and further and further. And then on October 19th now, so the puppy is still not even a year old, he's given a Cytopoint injection. And that is another immunosuppressant. It's not a steroid, but it tweaks with your immune system function, and it suppresses the immune system. And the notes say, strongly recommend a strict hypoallergenic diet trial with Royal Canin Ultamino for a minimum of 2 months. So they're telling the owners that this is an allergy that the dog has to the dog food, which is just utter nonsense. And just for our listeners, so they really understand what Royal Canin Ultamino is, it's a hypoallergenic type of dog food. So it's ultra high processed protein to the point to where the canine organism has no way of telling where the protein came from. So like all that information is basically just stripped from the actual compounds. And Ultamino, that food is made out of bird feathers. That's the protein in the food. So realistically, that is also going to destroy the dog's immune system if you were to put the dog on bird feathers as its diet. And it's been diagnosed with severe allergies now. So this is the time that I first got the call from the owners. And I started collecting all this information, and I put this all, the medical record into this Excel sheet, and I sent it to the owners, and they were just absolutely stunned. Because of course the vet never told them that the dog got sick with Bordetella because of that vaccine that was given to the dog, because it had no other place to get it from. So another significant issue was that the dog had some kind of a growth, like about a half-inch size ear growth on its right ear, developing for a few months at that point. And in terms of symptomatics, right, the dog had inflammation and redness between the toes, like on all four paws, some redness around the genital area, and pretty significant inflammation and discharge, like brown discharge in the ears, and also actual red inflammation underneath the eyes. And so this is all very consistent with an infection that the puppy would have acquired. And those infections may not necessarily be very potent, but because the dog's immune system has been just pounded to nothing over all these administrations of redundant vaccines and administrations of vaccines done at the wrong time, vaccines that the puppy didn't even need, more than he needed in terms of the boosters, and even medications that were given, like antibiotics like Claro, without actually diagnosing the bacteria that's present. You're just this is a compounding process of not even giving the puppy's immune system a chance to properly develop, especially with things like prednisone, right? A steroid is going to suppress the immune system very significantly. Apoquel is going to suppress the immune system. Cytopoint is going to suppress the immune system. So this is like a perfect storm on this poor puppy. And so we are in Las Vegas, they're in San Diego, and I started going through our regular process with them, right? Once I figured out what was all done to the dog, I explained how what was done incorrectly and improperly, and the owner was just in sheer shock once they received this spreadsheet. And he actually, I offered it to him, but I wasn't really pressing on it. I suggested to him, right, if he really wants to take care of it, he could come here to Las Vegas from San Diego, take the pup with him, and I'll go to our vet that we do trust, that we can rely on here in Las Vegas, to get this all taken care of, to get this sorted out, because I told him he needs specific tests. He needs certain blood tests done, and he needs certain cultures, biopsy, the growth, all kinds of things done. And all those, procedures, all those diagnostics, we can dictate it to another vet somewhere remotely, but who knows, they can even screw that up, of course. So he actually decided to follow up on that, and he came to Las Vegas, and I saw this poor dog. So at about a year old, we went on October 26th, where I actually saw everything that was going on with him. And immediately, of course, our veterinarian, Dr. Hack, said she clearly saw that there was just visible yeast inside the ears. There was obviously very strong suspicion for various bacterial infections all over his body. The large growth was biopsied on his ear. We also did a blood test to exclude sarcoptic mange, because some of the symptoms could have been potentially consistent with that. And then we put him on, first off, because he did have fungal growths, and especially not just the ears, but around his body. We did put him on fluconazole, which is an oral antifungal. And we waited for the culture results to come back from the skin scrapings and the ear that was done to determine what we would want to do with the specific bacterial infections. So we didn't jump the gun on like trying to administer antibiotics immediately. But one thing that we did do right at that visit, so as you can see here, right, this history is just littered with things that continuously suppressed and damaged his immune system. What we want to do with this kind of situation is we want to actually stimulate the immune system. So just like there are these drugs that are immunosuppressants, there are actually drugs out there in the world that are immunostimulants. They're not, I haven't seen any that are used here in the United States, unfortunately, but they do exist in Europe. And then some of them, they were even developed like in the former USSR, former Soviet Union, but also there are different European companies that do manufacture them. And there are a lot of studies on it. There's a lot of research on it. I think it's something that was some of these they're called peptides, so it's like hexapeptides, polypeptides in terms of structures, and the mystery of how they actually work to stimulate the immune system exists. Like they can understand like sort of partially what it's doing in terms of the immune system response, but they don't understand why it's working, which is really interesting. But there's been a lot of efficacy and safety studies done on these drugs, and that have shown them to be completely safe. And so that is what we turn to in this kind of situation. We used it's an injection called Immunofan, and you do a series of 3 or 4 1 cc subcutaneous injections to try to sort of kickstart the immune system back to get it working more at a normal level. And so that is something that we did immediately that day before they drove back. And once we got the culture result back for the ear, sure enough, these medications, Claro and Surolon, that the vet was blindly giving, pretty expensive stuff, by the way, to this dog. The antibiotic that's present in this medication had 0 efficacy to the bacteria that was present in the culture that was growing from that ear, which is why the dog continued to have ear infection for months. So once we got the culture results back and the correct ear medication was issued, Mometovet, that ear infection went away. And the big thing with regards to the surface infections, so like his genital area, his face, his paws, we didn't even use any kind of systemic antibiotics. We put him on shampoos. So let me go to let me finish this slide right here, right? So as of recently, last month, dog was completely back to normal with our very superficial regimen, like not trying to do too much in terms of medication. No more, so the infections completely disappeared on the paws, genital area, the ears as of December 1st. And very surprisingly, even to us, his half-inch size ear growth completely disappeared as of a couple weeks ago. And I suspect it is highly likely due to the immunostimulant injection that we actually did on that puppy. Because if you think about it, these kind of growths, even they're benign, right? I think we covered a little bit last time. Your immune system is your protection from these kind of mutated, even skin cells replicating themselves, when in fact, in a healthy immune system, they're going to get zapped and they're not even going to be given an opportunity to replicate themselves. So once his immune system started its road on recovery from being suppressed for the first year of life, then the immune system was actually able to take care of that abnormal growth that he had on his ear. And this is right here an actual email that can you see everything?
Yes.
So this is an email that I sent to the owners that day, right? So explaining what our plan is with regards to getting this dog back to normal. So the reason that we administered a 1.5 cc ivermectin 1% subcutaneous injection is because these symptoms that he did have in different parts of the body could be potentially due to something like sarcoptic mange. And sarcoptic mange, it's pretty difficult to diagnose visually, because that mange is really, really tiny. The only reliable test for it is a blood test where you test for antibodies for it. But given the dog condition, I didn't want to wait. And in the case of ivermectin, it is something that has absolutely no side effects. to a dog, like an American Bulldog. There are some breeds that have a genetic mutation where ivermectin can be deadly. So you have to be definitely careful with that. But in case of American Bulldogs, ivermectin, it's a very safe drug, and it's an anti-parasitic. So one thing that I want to talk about specifically with ivermectin, there are, with the pandemic that's going on, there's been a lot of noise about people wanting to use ivermectin. So to give you a little bit of background about ivermectin, it was developed in Japan in the 80s, and it really is sort of it's a miracle drug when it came out. It's a very potent anti-parasitic, which means that it's effective against parasites, right? So like in the case of dogs, like heartworms. It can also have some effect against certain other types of parasites that are not necessarily in the heart, but even like mites, right? Mange, whether it's Demodex or Trichoptic mange, maybe even some intestinal parasites. And its mode of function, I think this is really important to understand. Ivermectin is a neurotoxin. So it essentially destroys the neurology of the pest, right? So the host body, which is us or dogs, for example, when you're talking about ivermectin, you're taking ivermectin to kill off parasites that actually have a neurology that is susceptible to this chemical. And it is a poison that kills the neurology. Again, viruses do not have a neurology. Bacteria do not have a neurology. Any kind of fungus doesn't have a neurology. Neurology is it's it could be a premature type of it, but it's a brain essentially. So any kind of infections by beings that do not have an actual neurology, ivermectin cannot possibly have any mode of function or efficacy against. There's been some studies in especially third world countries where ivermectin use as a therapeutic has been linked to better outcomes with regards to the current pandemic. And that is extremely easy to explain why. It goes back to the fact that if an organism is infected with parasites, you're gonna have a suppressed immune system. Our biggest protection against the current pandemic is the immune system, right? That is capable of developing those antibodies, especially, that's how the vaccines work. They trigger your immune system to work against the virus coming into your body so that it can detect it and it can neutralize it with specific antibodies. So if a organism has a parasite infection, which in humans is extremely common in third world countries, it's going to be much more susceptible to any kind of infection, whether it's bacterial, viral, or fungal, including the current pandemic, right? So of course you want to have as healthy and as a function as like the best function of immune system you can have, which means you want to eliminate any kind of parasites you actually might have. And many of these parasites in humans, right, you're not going to have any symptoms. It's more rare, of course, right, in a developed world where a human could have parasites, but it's probably way underdiagnosed. So there are definitely parasites that do infect humans, especially people that have pets like cats and dogs. In some other countries, it's actually a normal protocol that you actually take a deworming medication as a human, as a dog owner, at least on an annual basis, as a prophylactic. So back to this specific case of the dog. So it turned out that the blood test for the sarcoptic mange that what I was potentially concerned about did come back negative. So it was it turned out to be a non-issue. But at the very least, right, the ivermectin subcutaneous injection didn't hurt the dog in any way because it's completely harmless so long as you do the dosing correctly. And the dog was put on Mometavet, which is the ear ointment that actually the vet and I both agreed. We thought like that's the one that will work if those others didn't. And so we actually preemptively started this medication before the culture results for the ear came back. But once they came back, by the time they came back, the ear was already healed. So we knew it was working, and it was completely confirmed by those culture results that the antibiotic contained in the Mometavet ointment is effective against the present bacteria, whereas the other ear ointments that were used by the previous vets were not, because they never bothered to do the culture. And so we proceeded to tell them, instruct them to do the second, third, and fourth dose of this immunofunding injection. It's just like a 1 cc injection, almost like a vial that looks like a vaccine type of vial. And I, of course, want the owners to keep in touch with me to provide me with constant updates on how the dog is improving and what's happening with the dog. So I asked them to, keep me posted. And once we had the result for sarcoptic mange come back negative, I asked them not even to follow through on the ivermectin injection because I had a pretty strong suspicion that it could be sarcoptic mange. So it turned out to be negative, so we didn't do those injections. But then this right here is what was really critical, right? So fluconazole was an antifungal because the dog had fungal infection. That's why the dog had some of that inflammation as well, beside the bacteria. That's why the dog had some even itchiness. Once he got put on this, those symptoms disappeared. And with the ears, you always want to use first a type of flush to clean the ears and clear off all the gunk before you apply the medication, which is what we instructed the donors to do here. And then in terms of any kind of inflammation and so the infections that he had on his face and his paws and his genital area, we simply took care of it with these two shampoos. Benzoyl peroxide shampoo, it's a fantastic shampoo that really like exfoliates in the sense that it helps clean the skin very well to where it removes all the dead skin cells. So you're exposing, the good surface layer of the skin. And then we asked them to apply this specific shampoo. It's called Vet Basics Chlorconazole. So it's chlorhexidine and ketoconazole are the active ingredients. So it's both antimicrobial and antifungal, and you want to leave it on for 10 minutes. So once we actually had, actual diagnostics done on the dog, and again, we didn't even, at the end of the day, we didn't even give the dog any kind of oral antibiotics for this case because it was all superficial infections on the skin in terms of the bacteria that was diagnosed. It was 3 types of strains of bacteria that we found in terms of the culture. It was all taken care of just by this shampoo. And we never switched them to any other food because there was no food allergy. And now the dog is completely normal, in full health. And again, shockingly, his entire half-inch size growth on his ear completely disappeared as well.
It's amazing. It's
That poor
amazing.
pup. Oh my goodness.
I was really concerned. I was actually very surprised when we did, because we did complete blood count and blood chemistry blood tests on him when he came to us here to Las Vegas. I definitely thought, given that all these things that were done to him over the past, like the very first year of his life, 25 pages worth of medical records, I thought that he would have some abnormal blood test results. Thankfully, he didn't. And I think that really goes to show, how resilient dogs are. And so that was very much a pleasant surprise. But, you know, observe how them going to the vet, right? You could already see where this dog was going to be, the trajectory of this dog with those other vets. It was going to be consistent, like constant immunosuppressive medication, whether it's steroids or Apoquel or Cytopoint, combined with bird feather diet and undiagnosed, untreated actual infections on the body of the dog, whether it be, you know, the groin area, the paws, the ears, right? So it's something that there's just absolutely no way out, because these vets just, they don't seem to have the very, you know, basic foundational understanding of how to practice medicine.
Okay, Igor, I have a question. I think it's pretty obvious, but I'm going to state it anyway. So it's a fair statement that vet number one did nothing good for that dog. In fact, there appears to be obvious malpractice, negligence, et cetera. And the dog only started to improve when you got involved and your vet got involved. Is that a fair statement?
Well, yeah, because we started literally doing the opposite, right? Instead of just loading and stressing the immune system that of a developing puppy, we went the opposite route. We started trying to stimulate the immune system, and given the dog a chance by only treating that superficial bacterial infection that was present on the skin, or the fungal infection for the most part, topically, right? Fluconazole wasn't necessary because you know, so long as a dog is drinking a lot of water, it's not gonna hit the immune system too hard as a medication, especially if it's not prescribed for a long time. But it's a matter of being very careful with what you do with the things that a vet is doing. They always have to be very conscious of how is this medication or how is this vaccination going to affect the immune system of the puppy. And they always have to consider the timing of everything. You cannot be vaccinating a sick dog, which is here. They did like 3 times, all on a dog that already had kennel cough from a vaccine they themselves gave him.
Okay, I would like you to, after we get done here, after we wrap up, I'd like you to stick around for a few minutes if you're able. I want to talk to you about this case a little bit more.
Sure.
Okay. Okay. All right. So I guess that was very eye-opening, very interesting, and very sad in the beginning, happy at the end that you were able to intervene with your vet and get the right things done for the dog. That's wonderful. I think we all applaud you for that.
Well, thank you.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I mean, I was not very optimistic initially. I'm really glad that, you know, of course, now they keep in touch with us on a much more regular basis than they did before, and the dog is fully normal very fast, right? Within 2 months.
Okay. Cool.
I did not think that the dog would be able to make such a recovery after such abuse of the dog's immune system.
Right. Right. Okay. All right. So, Colleen, do you have any thoughts or questions?
So was this like one of the worst cases that you've seen, or like are these becoming more and more common? Like, what's your take on this particular?
So my take on this particular case is, I think this is probably the most very, very prevalent
Gotcha.
type of malpractice that the owner doesn't realize is happening, right? So initially the dog was healthy, right? And then the vet, like, I mean, they're saying the dog has quote unquote allergies, and during the same visit, they're also labeling the dog as healthy. They're
Right.
prescribing that, they're giving the dog some kind of ear medication for an ear infection while the dog is quote unquote healthy. And they're giving other elective medicines like Bravecto during that same visit.
Yeah.
You know, it's those things. goes back to the basics. I think that the other day I caught a snippet of one of your interviews, Scott, and the vet was saying you cannot administer vaccines on a sick dog. And here, this was done in spades.
Yeah. Sure was.
And so this is a type, the kind of keywords here, right? Like prednisone, Apoquel, Cytopoint, ear infection. That stuff is so common, especially I think it's going to be a very common experience for a lot of owners. And they have to understand that it all goes back to how, in many instances, right, how the vet has managed to really screw up the dog's immune system when it was a small puppy. That's because all these pathogens, right, they're very opportunistic, right? Like staph bacteria. It's a bacteria that's present on your skin at all times. It only becomes an infection when your immune system doesn't have the strength to actually neutralize that colony, neutralize that infection, right? Because you live in harmony with staph on your skin at all times. Same thing with, yeast. We have yeast inside our organism, as do dogs. It becomes an infection when your immune system is compromised. So, right, it's not like, so you have to think of it from those terms. If your dog is getting these infections, understand that the cause is that there's a problem with your dog's immune system. And for the most part, that problem with the immune system is almost like orchestrated by the carelessness of veterinarians.
Okay. All right. We're going to wrap for tonight. Igor, we'll see you next Friday night, right?
Yeah, we'll check. I thought it might have been in 2 weeks, but we'll see.
All right. If you're available, we'd love to have you.
I'll just have to check on the schedule. It's either going to be next week or the week after, for sure.
Okay, that's fine. Okay. All right. So we'll say goodnight for now. Igor, hang around. I want to talk to you a little bit, and we'll see you. We'll see you Sunday night for Veterinary Tales. And don't forget to join us 8 p.m. Eastern. And I hope we see Igor next Friday night or the next Friday night after that, because tonight was really, really, really illuminating, very educational. And that's what we strive for with these podcasts, to educate our companion animal parents and make them the best advocates that they can possibly be for their loved ones. And okay, I guess we'll say goodnight. Thanks for joining us, everybody.
Bye.
Thank you. Good night, everybody.
Good night.